Welcome, Political Science 370 Social Science Research Methods class. Today we will be going over an article that was selected by Matthew Bradbury, and it is called Developing a Better Understanding of the Personal Dimensions of Working at the Central Intelligence Agency. Michael.
Yeah.
What is it like working at the CIA?
It's tough. I don't know. I have no idea.
Unless television and movies have lied to you, what is it like?
Oh, exciting, I guess. You get to, break into buildings and break up terrorist plots. I don't know.
Live in other countries, all kinds of stuff. So most people get this view of working at the Central Intelligence Agency from pop culture. Spy novels, Jack Ryan, even, like Meet the Parents. The dad worked at the CIA, and, he's a human lie detector. And all these types of things. If you go back, they remade this movie a while ago. The In-Laws, guy and a girl about to get married, the in-laws meet. And, one of the parents works at the CIA and involves the other in this plot. And so those are misperceptions of what it's like to work at the CIA. That's kind of how the article starts, is by saying, if you're relying on pop culture to tell you how it's like working at the CIA, what it's like working at the CIA, you're gonna be disappointed when you go to apply for a job there, right? Okay, so next thing about working at the CIA, do they have a lot of applicants or not enough, do you think?
I think they'd have too many, but I
don't
know.
Yeah, actually they do. They have plenty of applicants to choose from, because again, it's seen as being an exciting job, one where you're helping your country, one where you're helping to make the world a safer place. It pays well. It's government employment, so it's stable, good benefits, decent pay, and so there are plenty of applicants. So the question becomes, how are people going to get proper information, about what it's like to work for the CIA? Because the CIA doesn't talk a lot about, exactly what it does. It's kind of shrouded in secrecy, right? So, in this research, the researcher, Hector J. Escobar III, he says, basically, I'm going to go to the CIA's website and look at that, and then interview 7 people that used to work at the CIA, and see what they can tell me about working at the CIA, and then come to some conclusions, right? Okay, so first off, he goes to the CIA's website. On their website, do you think any testimonials that employees give are positive or negative?
Positive.
Yeah, they're all positive. That's the thing, right? And unfortunately, if all the testimonials are positive and you never get any negative information about what it's like to work for the CIA, then what's going to happen to employee turnover?
Oh, Turnover. Increase, I think.
It's going to increase. Exactly. And does it cost the CIA, does it cost any employer a lot of money to hire somebody?
Yeah.
And train them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, depending on how technical your training is and how much time and effort went into it, you don't want a high turnover rate if you're the CIA, right? Also, you just from an organizational standpoint, you want there to be a good fit between the organization and the people that you hire, right? So that you don't have discontented employees for a long time. So that goes back to our original question. How many people apply to become CIA agents? Plenty of people apply, right? So the CIA should give an accurate portrayal of what it's like working at the CIA, rather than just totally positive on its website. Yeah. So this guy gets a hold of 7 people that worked for the CIA. And then he basically has about an hour-long interview with them over the phone and kind of some follow-up by email. 7 people, right? So is this research primarily quantitative or qualitative, do you think? Qualitative, exactly. Descriptive, exploratory, explanatory, or evaluation? Exploratory, yeah. Why are you going to say it's primarily qualitative and exploratory?
There just aren't the numbers there to make any quantitative conclusions about anything.
Yeah, the sample size is just too small, right? You have an N of 7. And that's just too small to do any hypothesis testing with and that type of thing. So he's, in his defense, in the article writer's defense, anything we get from these people is more than we have, right? Because pop culture is not right about things. The CIA's website just contains positive information. And so he asks these people a number of questions. I'll give you an example of the type of question they ask. This guy says to the question, why did you join the CIA? This guy says there was no career planning, it was a generational thing, married into the CIA, worked in the foreign services as a staff officer, met my spouse while working, who worked for the CIA, died suddenly 3 years after marriage, and the CIA offered me a job. The CIA is very good at taking care of its family. My spouse worked in operations, and since they were the ones to offer me a job, that's how I began my career in operations. So, it's kind of very anecdotal approach to how you got your job with the CIA. I was in the foreign service. Remember, my wife was in the CIA. She passed away. They gave me a job. And you're kind of like, okay, I don't know how much that helps me get a job with the CIA, though. So it's kind of odd. There was another question. What, if any, difficulties are encountered while employed at the CIA? A guy answered having diarrhea in a foreign country, that you don't know the language. Got to a pharmacy, tried to get medicine for it. Simple circumstances turned very difficult. It's part of the job. So I guess so, right? That's not on the CIA's website, right?
Or in action movies.
Or in action movies, yeah. But I imagine actually it happens all the time, but we don't discuss that. So, there were kind of some interesting answers to some of the questions in there. But at the end of the day, because of the sample size, you can't do any hypothesis testing. You can't really make any generalizations. These are just some kind of anecdotal stories from different people, right? It was interesting though. Even at just these 7, all but one individual stated that they did not encounter any difficulties while employed at the CIA. So granted, it's just 7 people, right? But still, out of those 7, only one said that they encountered any difficulties while working at the CIA. So, yeah, and again, what can you draw from that? I don't know. It's 7 people, so you have to be careful about that. Another one of the questions was it difficult to balance life at the CIA with life outside of the CIA? And the author said all interviewees felt that balancing the CIA with their personal lives was as complicated as any other job, just in a different sense. Okay. So one person responded, "It's useful early on to tell your family roughly what you are doing, so they understand that at times you can't make it home for dinner or that you have to travel for a while and won't be there. A strong family relationship mitigates problems that may arise, and every job can cause issues. I'm not persuaded that because one has a challenging job at the agency that it is the sole cause for your divorce. You need good communication between you. As far as children, there is a time for your child to hear what you do. Till then, they do not care what you do for a living. Your family will get used to hearing, 'I can't talk about it.'" Okay. Yeah. So the paper kind of breezes along. Not to speak too disparagingly about the paper, right? I mean, it's not a rigorous academic paper that appears in like the top journals, but it makes a contribution. Like I said, the information on what it's like to work for the CIA is really limited. So, does this article make a contribution?
I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose so, right? If you start with close to nothing, then anything makes a contribution, right? So it's pretty valid. Now, in the author's limitations on the study, they said a larger sample would have been preferable. I agree. I kind of don't know why a snowball sampling method was not used. It would have seemed pretty appropriate in this situation. The author says there were time requirements based on the IRB requirements that he had, Institutional Review Board. In all honesty, this paper looks like it was done, and I don't mean to be mean or anything, but this wasn't done by an established researcher. This is probably done by someone who was a graduate student, or something like that, or an original research project, right? As an undergraduate even, maybe. I don't know for sure. I mean, it's good, But the thing is, it's not at a rigorous scientific level compared to other research. At the end of the day, he looked at the CIA's website. Well, I'm just being honest. He looked at the CIA's website. He saw what information was available. He came up with a number of questions to ask 7 people that worked at the CIA, and it got printed in this Journal of Strategic Security. All right. Yeah, I've been cooped up too long, I guess.
I hope he doesn't watch this
video.
Make him sad.
Yeah, I think it would make him a little sad. Like, overall, it's good, but let's just be honest, the paper, the paper you looked at by Jennifer Lawless, that is just outstanding research that addresses fundamental questions, about representation and disparities in representation, and what leads to disparities in representation. I mean, that's at the heart of democratic processes, right? This is, how does the CIA recruit? It's a much more narrow question. Not to be disparaging, it's just a much more narrow question. So, there it is. So, he says that's a limitation. So if he didn't have the time constraints, do you think a snowball sample would have been appropriate?
Yeah.
So when do we use snowball samples?
Hard to reach populations.
Hard to reach populations, exactly. And so, do guys within the CIA probably know do former CIA agents probably know other former CIA agents?
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
I bet they do, exactly. So, snowball sample, if you wanted to make this more rigorous, and eventually quantitative at some point, then that's how you could obtain a sample, right? Next, he said future research could also include the testimonies of spouses or children of former CIA officers in order to get both perspectives of how life is affected during and after the spouse or parent's employment at the CIA. And so that's worthwhile. But, like I said, I think probably your next step is larger sample size, right? And then once you get more information from former CIA agents, then you go from there, type of thing. Now, next thing, he says this in the conclusion. The author says this in the conclusion. The only things you hear about... Oh, this was a quote. I'm sorry, this is a quote from the CIA agent. The only things you hear about are the failures or shortcomings of the agency. You never hear the good stories or successes. Okay, well, welcome to being a government employee, not just a CIA agent, right? I mean, does that frustration apply to government employment in general?
Yeah.
Yes, and again, I cover that in a number of my classes, whether it's American National Government 200 or Social Science Research Methods. We cover the fact that, government does a pretty good job on a day-to-day basis. And when does something make the news? When something goes wrong.
Yeah.
In general, do we have a very safe food supply in the United States?
Yeah.
Yes. The Food and Drug Administration overall does a really good job, right? Mm-hmm. When do you hear about things going wrong? When there's a listeria problem or, something like that.
8 killed.
Yeah, exactly. So, So I'll read that quote again. The only things you hear about are the failures or shortcomings of the agency. You never hear the good stories or successes. That is not unique to the CIA. That is something that a lot of government employees get frustrated with, right? So the paper can be summed up pretty well in the conclusion. In conclusion, it is pertinent for potential employees to be provided as much information as possible prior to applying. By providing unbiased, unscripted testimonies to potential employees via the CIA website, potential employees will have a better understanding of who works at the CIA and what CIA life is like. By doing so, both the employer and employee can avoid cultural mismatch, aiding job fit and employee retention. Also, I have shown that it is possible to allow an in-depth look at what working at the CIA is like without divulging any sensitive information that could be damaging to the CIA or national security. What do you think of the article?
I don't know. It's funny. He's doing this to tell them to revise their website. I mean, it's just kind of funny. So.
Yeah, fairly narrow question. But like I say, it's worthwhile. I gotta tell you one. There's a quote in here which is really good, and I think, dear methods students, this is kind of one of the more important things you can get from this study here. Is the CIA is an organization, right? Is the FBI an organization?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is the cheerleading team an organization?
Suppose so.
Suppose so. Yeah, exactly. Is the soccer team an organization?
Yep.
Yes. Is a church congregation an organization?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? And so people are involved with different organizations in their life, right? Whether it's an employer, religious group, recreational activities, right? We're all involved in different organizations, right? So, this guy quotes a more extensive study, right? In Dr. Rob Johnston's Analytic Culture in the U.S. Intelligence Community, an ethnographic study, right? Okay. The U.S. Intelligence Community, an ethnographic study, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This is methods. When we talk about ethnography, usually what do we associate it with more?
Like race or what?
Yeah. Or it's again, usually I'm gonna go explore what happens among this tribe in New Guinea.
Oh wait, what does ethnography mean? Does that mean ethnic group?
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, what do you mean by ethnic group, right? And so that's the whole point, see, right? An ethnographic study, right? So people that go to work in the intelligence community, they have their own community.
Oh.
Make sense?
Yeah.
They have their own group. They have their own organization. They have their own identity, right? Say what you want. And so this Dr. Rob Johnston wrote a book called Analytic Culture in the U.S. Intelligence Community, an Ethnographic Study. It's co-written by another gentleman. And they state, every organization has a unique culture that is defined partly by its individual members and partly by its structure, history, and policies. For that culture to endure, it must be transmitted from current members to new members. This process, known as organizational socialization, is especially important in organizations with strong insular cultures, as those with weak cultures have less to transmit and will tend to experience culture changes as members come and go.
Interesting.
Yeah, right? And so, I guess what I'm telling you, and my methods class, you don't have to go to New Guinea to find interesting groups, organizations, cultures to study.
Yeah.
They surround you. They're everywhere. And there's a lot of potential for research there. Right? How do you become a member of the group? How do you get kind of, so initially kind of like, how are you recruited? How do you kind of get settled in? And then, how do you become really established? Those are the things. So they look basically, in that research, they said the 3 stages of organizational socialization are getting in, or anticipatory socialization, breaking in, or accommodation, and settling in, often referred to as role management. So that happens with any organization, and it's worth exploring. Like I say, you don't have to go to New Guinea in order to find interesting groups to explore and see how their culture is transmitted. Or, in the context of organizations, how organizational culture is transmitted.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting. So, to put that in context of this study here, which phase does he focus on? Getting in, breaking in, or settling in?
Getting in.
Getting in, exactly. And who gets in is going to have an impact, in the long run, on what your organizational culture is like. Well, it has been a pleasure. Interesting study. Good job, Matthew. Bradbury. I'm not talking to my son. And like I said, overall, for the questions it tackled, this was a good paper. Is it, gonna turn the world on its head? No.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions done?